I suppose you have noted, as you have studied the Bible, that the word burden occurs very often in the writings of the prophets. I never thought much of what this word means until I had an experience that impressed upon me the burden that Sister White carried for this people. I read of Moses in the 11th chapter of Numbers. At one time he even complained to the Lord about the burden of Israel, and he thought it was too heavy for him to carry. It's when the children of Israel got tired of the manna and wanted something different. Then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent, weeping for something different from the manna. Men were weeping, everybody weeping, so tired of that manna. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses also was displeased. And Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of this people upon me? Even Moses got so weary of the children of Israel. Now, you and I know our own weaknesses, and each of us, and our own troubles, and that we think is about all we can bear, and sometimes more than we can bear. What if we knew the weaknesses, the faults, and the troubles of a whole people, and was commissioned to try to help that people to overcome their faults and to serve the Lord and be purified by the following his word? When you think of it, does not a burden roll upon your soul? It does upon mine, as I realize the great responsibility that every prophet carried for the spiritual welfare of his people. I was impressed with this by an experience that I once had. I was a guest of one of her secretaries. Now, this secretary had a little cottage very near to the home of Sister White in Elm's Haven. And I was given a room where, as I lay in bed, I could look right up to the window of Sister White's writing room, her office, where she wrote. I'm not a very good sleeper. I lay awake a long time in the night. Finally, 12 o'clock passed. I could look right out through the window up to Sister White's window. And I got to thinking about her. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I saw a light there. Then I remembered. Then in her latter days particularly, she went to bed very early. In fact, she told me she went to bed with the birds. And that she usually awoke between 1 and 2 and wrote until morning the things which had been revealed to her while she slept. And as I saw that light come on in her room about 1 o'clock in the morning, I said, oh, now she is writing. But no. Before she wrote, she prayed. And she prayed aloud. And I heard her prayer. I have never heard such a prayer anywhere from anyone at any time. She was pleading with God for you and for me, for the people of God, that we might not fail to do the work that had been given us to do. And then she talked with God about our weaknesses and where we were failing, and pleading with God that His Spirit might speak to every heart, and that we might reform and hasten to do the work that should be done in the world for lost souls. I learned that night what the burden of Sister White was for this people. Presently there was silence, and I lay there, and that light did not go out till dawn. Later in the day I met Miss McInterfer, and I said, Sister White did considerable writing last night, did she not? Yes, she said. There was a great heap of manuscript by her table. Now, she always used a certain marble-top table that had been given her in Australia. She brought it back with her. And she wrote on it, and as she wrote, she allowed the manuscript to fall on the floor. Just fall right over the edge. And there was a great pile of it in the morning. Miss McIntyre gathered it up, took it to a typist. It was copied. No changes made except that it was capitalized and punctuated. No, Sister White didn't know much about punctuation, and her typist did that for her. But they were not in any wise to change anything. Then after she'd had her breakfast and had exercised a little and had her breathing exercises, it was returned to her. She read it carefully. She sometimes made some additions or expressed herself differently. Now in this prayer that I heard her pray, she prayed for us all, for the people of God. But before she finished, she prayed for herself. And she asked God particularly to help her to express the thoughts that He had given her that night. While she slept, He had given her a message. Now she prayed that she might have the words with which to express that message. So no one was to change it. You understand. One did attempt it once, twice. The first time she called her in and talked with her, and this lady, who was a highly educated lady and thought she knew a great many things, said, "But Sister White, that is what, I'm sure that's what you intended to say. That's what you meant to say." "Oh no," she said, "I said what I meant to say." Now, you must not do this again. A month went by, and this secretary was tempted again. She was sure that Sister White hadn't been able to express herself and say exactly what she wanted to say, so she changed it again. And then Sister White called her in, and she said, "My dear, you have changed. You have changed my manuscript again." "Yes, but Sister White, you really did mean to say that now, didn't you?" "No, I didn't. I said what I meant to say." "And now, my dear, I had hoped that you would remain with me, that I might keep you as long as I have anything to write. But since you cannot resist the temptation to exercise your own judgment as to what I mean, I will have to let you go, that you may occupy a less responsible position." "I'm very sorry," she said. "I'm very sorry. But I cannot have my manuscript changed." Sister White, as you know from her writings, was always interested in the works of God, in nature. This home that was purchased for her at Elmshaven was a farm. And she sent back to Australia for a farmer. There was a man in Australia that had quite a large family and had met with some reverses, but he was an excellent farmer. His name was James, Brother James. So she sent for him to come and manage the farm, and a most wonderful farmer he proved to be. She was very fond of his children. He had quite a large family. I remember when I first came to Mountain View, the first time I came here, one of his daughters was teaching the church school here in Mountain View. Well, one of her helpers said to me one day, she said, I'm going to tell you a secret. Now, you mustn't tell Sister White, because we don't want her to go out. It's been raining last night, but there's a new little calf in the cow barn, and if she knew it, she'd have to go out to see it. So we're not telling her anything about it. Well, of course, I wasn't going to say anything, but somebody did. I think she asked a question, and then she must go. She must go at once to see that new little baby calf. And Miss McIntyre said, Mother, it's been raining. It's wet outside. You'll get your feet wet. But I'll put on my galoshes, she said. But it's too wet. You'll get your skirts wet. Well, I'll put on my short skirt. Now, a short skirt didn't mean to her what it does today. It meant a skirt that was 8 inches from the ground. And that was quite enough. So she put on her short skirt. And they brought the heaviest coat she had and wrapped up her head. And Miss McIntyre took her arm, and they went to the barn. Now, I must admit that I was so curious that I trailed along behind. Oh, how she did. You'd almost say rave over that new calf. What a beautiful calf it was. So strong and healthy. She's sure to make a lovely cow. Then she had to see the horses. And Brother James brought out the horses and paraded them before her. She petted them all. And then Miss McIntyre said, Now, Mother, we have something very, very pretty in the chicken house. You sit down here on this stump. There was a stump in the yard. And I'll bring you something pretty. So she went into the chicken house, and there were some new little chickens just hatched out. Lovely, fluffy, downy little chickens. You know how pretty they are. She brought them out and put them in Sister White's lap. Oh, how pleased she was. And you know, when I think of her, and of the many times I saw her in different places and at different times, the sweetest memory I have of her is sitting there on the stump with those little chickens in her lap, loving them, petting them, because I said to myself, for a little time, she can lay aside her burden, be free, be happy with the things that God has made. Most of the time she has to be dealing with your faults and mine. But just for a few minutes, the works of God, untouched by our faults, was her relaxation. And she looked so happy. She looked so rested. I'll never forget it. Well, later in the day, I received an invitation to come to dinner with her. Oh, what an honor. And when I went to dinner, I was seated next to her. Her secretaries were at the table. I remember that Elder C.C. Chrysler, was then at the head of her secretarial staff. He sat at the head of the table. And I remember also that she had two special dishes that the rest of us didn't have. One was a dish of greens. In her later days, she had greens for dinner every day. She said they were good for elderly people. And she also had a cup of red clover tea. I'd forgotten about this in years afterwards, but some years after I came here, I was terribly troubled with indigestion. And dear Sister Lloyd came in one day and found me in misery. She went straight home, got her red clover tea and brought it over and made me a cup of it, and I drank it with great relief. And then I used it quite regularly until my stomach difficulty was cured, and I've had no trouble since. I once met Dr. Alma, and we're quite friends. I've been his patient so many times. And I asked him why it was that the red clover tea was such a relief to me. He said, "You are disposed to be very acid." And then he smiled when he said it. And this red clover is an alkaline, and it alkalizes your stomach and relieves your distress. He said, "I advise you to use it whenever you have any difficulty." I pass it on to you. When the college was established, Professor Irwin often went down and implored Sister White to come up and speak to the students, and she did as often as she could. And I remember one time when she was growing feeble, they brought her up the night before so that she could be rested and be able to speak to us in the morning at chapel. And she remained until afternoon. And so at dinner time, when she was seated at the table, what did Miss McIntyre do but bring in her usual dish of greens? She'd brought it from home, taken it to the kitchen and warmed it, and brought it in for Sister White. And Sister White said, "Oh, Sarah, I could have gotten along without my greens for one meal." You see, she was embarrassed because she was the only one at the table that had greens. And Sister McIntyre, who was very practical, said, "No need, Mother, for you to go without your greens." And then she explained that Mother had greens every day, and she said, "I'm sure that you understand that it's quite all right for her to have greens, even if no one else here has this dish today." Well, later that same day that she went out to see the calf was the fourth day of July. And a little later in the morning, there came an invitation from the St. Helena Sanitarium to an outing that afternoon in the grounds that are over the hill back at the sanitarium. The sanitarium has a playground over there, and it's a very beautiful spot. And they were going to have a little get-together over there, all that could be spared of the helpers in the sanitarium, and they invited Sister White and her helpers to come and join them. And Sister White thanked them and said she surely would come. Well, she was sitting alone outside under a tree when the invitation came. It was always also extended to me. And she spoke to me and she said, I'd be so happy to go to the sanitarium and see all the people. She said, I very, very seldom get to visit with our people. Just think of it. Always those serious matters she must be thinking about. She had visitors, but it was ministers and workers that came to ask her advice or to talk over with her some serious matter. And she was just looking forward to an afternoon with her friends at the sanitarium and the lovely visit she would have with them. But along came her nurse, Miss McIntyre, and she said, "But Mother, don't you remember that on Monday we start east on that long trip, and how many camp meetings we must visit? You must save your strength for that, and you might catch cold if you go up there today. And it will weary you, Mother. You mustn't go." "Oh, but Sarah, dear, if you would take my rocking chair and a wrap, that heavy wrap that they gave me when I was in Norway, I wouldn't catch cold, and I think it would be a rest, Sarah, dear." "Well, Mother, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry, but it won't do. You know these long trips, how much strength it takes, and you must be able to speak to the people when we get there." "But Sarah, I would just so love to spend a little time. It's been so long since I saw the people at the sanitarium." "No, Mother. Be too great a strain upon you. Take too much of your strength." And she gave up. But you know, I feel sad about it yet. But it only illustrates what I said last Wednesday evening, that when it was a matter of her own convenience or her own pleasure, like giving up her home in Healdsburg and giving up going to the outing, she gave up. But if it had been a matter of principle, if it had been a matter of policy, you couldn't have moved her any more than you could move Gibraltar. I'm often reminded of what the Desire of Ages says concerning Jesus. He never contended for his rights, but always for the right. There's a difference, you know. There's a difference between contending for the right and contending for my rights. She never did. When I saw you coming in at the door there tonight, I was reminded of something that occurred in this church. Did you know that long ago, Mountain View was the headquarters for the Union Conference? And the Union Conference offices lived here. And on this corner over here, where they're building a new apartment house, you remember, was a little building that stood there for a long time and looked so forlorn, all closed up. Well, that was the Union Conference office. But that was a long time ago. In 1909 and 10, I was in conference work, and so when there was a Union Conference annual meeting, I came here to attend it. Now, this room wasn't more than half as big then as it is now. You know, this church has been enlarged twice. And the first was a very neat little church, and it was full that day of conference workers chiefly. I remember I sat right over there. And the meeting opened, but before it progressed very long, I had an uncomfortable feeling that something was wrong. The meeting didn't seem to progress as it should. Whenever the Union Conference president suggested something, there was always somebody who saw that it wasn't a good idea. And when the delegates had something, then the Union Conference president didn't seem to approve of it. So we went through a whole day without accomplishing anything. And nobody said anything, but I felt when that night Well, I felt to pray very earnestly. I didn't understand what was the matter, but I felt that something was the matter. And I prayed that we might make some progress the next day. Well, the next morning we all came together again and had the opening exercises. And then the door opened. Now we would receive the word that Sister White was not well and that she wouldn't be able to come to the conference. But the door opened and she walked in. And when I saw her face, by that time I'd grown rather accustomed to her expression. I said, there's something serious on her mind. I wonder why she has come to the conference when she was reported to have been ill. She walked up here, and the conference president saw her and went down to meet her, greeted her, and he said, Sister White, have you a word for us this morning? She said, yes, indeed I have. So he brought her up here. I thought of it tonight when I came up here to this rostrum. And she came immediately to the desk. She said, I had not intended to come here because I have been ill. But the Lord had told me that I was needed here. So I have come. And he has revealed to me some of the differences in this union. Then she turned to the union conference president. I'll never forget it. She said, my brother, when you were made president of this union, God did not call you to be a dictator. Then she looked down at the row of ministers in front. And my brethren, you shouldn't be so sensitive. Then she went on to explain that God had revealed to her that there were differences between the president and many strong-minded ministers in the conference, and that so long as that existed, the work of God would stand still. Now she said, God has a wonderful plan for the development of the work in California, especially in Southern California. She said every year thousands of tourists come to Southern California, many of them in poor health. There should be, scattered over Southern California, a number of sanitariums so that these people could be cared for while they are here and instructed in the principles of healthful living. God wants to do a great work in Southern California, but he cannot do it unless you come together in unity and work together. His work is being delayed because of your differences. Now, brethren, the case isn't hopeless. You just look into your own hearts now and be honest with yourselves. Ask God to help you to see your hearts and to see if the ideas you hold, if you're positively sure that you're right and nobody else is. Then she prayed. And when she finished, I never saw such a melting down in all my life. These ministers were all weeping. Well, I think we all were in the room. And they came up here to the, well, they didn't get up here because the president came down to them. And such a breaking down I've never seen anywhere. And then, why, the business just went of itself, and we were all agreed. Oh, how wonderful it is when brethren dwell together in unity, isn't it? when brethren dwell together in unity. What mighty things God can do. And you know, it was very interesting to me to watch the advance of the work in Southern California, one sanitarium after another coming into being down there. I was one of the first patients in Loma Linda Sanitarium, and remembered that she said that there were places already built in Southern California that were perfectly adapted to our work. If we would all agree, God will help us to find them. And very shortly, Brother Burden found this one, Loma Linda. And I was, having read all about it, she said it was in perfect order, and it was. There were the most beautifully polished floors, and there wasn't a scratch on them anywhere. The draperies weren't faded. The kitchen was in perfect order. I remember the brother that went there as the first cook in Loma Linda, and when he went into that kitchen, he wept for joy. He said he never walked into a kitchen so well appointed as was that, with all the silver shining. Must have had a wonderful caretaker there. You know, it had been built for a sanitarium by the doctors in Los Angeles, the doctors of the world. They had learned of the great success that Seventh-day Adventists had with sanitariums. So they thought they'd build one. But when they got it built and had it so beautifully furnished, they couldn't get anybody to go out there. 60 miles from Los Angeles? No. Like going around the world. And they wouldn't go. They couldn't get their patients to go. You know, they'd even built treatment rooms, but I smiled when I saw them. You could hardly turn around in them. They had forgotten, you know, or they didn't know that you had to have quite a bit of room in a treatment room. If you were going to give treatment, there wasn't room to bring a table in. But they were doing the best they knew. They knew that Seventh-day Adventists had succeeded wonderfully with sanitariums, and they thought that they could too. But they didn't have all the lights, you know. And there that building had stood for 2 years, and yet it had been kept in perfect order. There were the barns, the cow pastures, the horses, the carriages, all in perfect order, just as if they were made for us. And we got it because, for a very low sum, because we had come finally into the unity of the faith. And they had the same experience when in Glendale, buying a building already built, hadn't been built for sanitarium, but it proved to be very well adapted for it, at a very small sum. Well, the lesson I've never forgotten, that when there's unity among us, God can work mightily. When I speak of Healdsburg College and of Healdsburg, I'm speaking in the dearest spot on earth to me. But I had to live there and see that institution that I loved so much go down and down and down until it was decided that it must be moved, that we must seek a new location. The town grew up around the building and close by. There was no room for expansion. And many other things came in that were very unfortunate. And so Healdsburg College was closed. Well, where should we go? Men just ran all over Sonoma County and Napa County. They searched here and there and everywhere. Finally, even came very near buying a place over at Sonora. Nobody could agree on it. Then they went to Sister White. And she said, I saw a place not very far from St. Helena Sanitarium in the mountains. If you search, you'll find it. and they found it. They found the Angren summer resort. And Mr. Angren had just decided to go out of business, and his place was up for sale. She said that she saw groups of students early in the morning going out into the forest on those hills for prayer. She'd seen them. She said, if I ever meet them, I shall know them. It was my privilege to teach there for 8 years. And oftentimes when I got up early in the morning, I'd go to the window at once, and I'd see a group of young men from the young men's dormitory. Oh, very early in the morning, about 5 o'clock, come out of the dormitory with their Bibles, go off up among the trees into the hills. Then I'd look over at the young women's dormitory. I'd see them come out of there and go over to what was called Deer Park, a place that was set aside for them. What for? For prayer. Now, she'd seen that long before. She said, I saw them. I often think of those students. I followed them, those that went up there for morning prayers. They're all workers in the cause of God. I met one not long ago, and he spoke about those morning prayer meetings, those prayer bands up among the trees. He had seen them long before. She was advised, before this, as you know, she was in Australia and established the Australasian Missionary College. Now, from 1901 until 1909, the principal of that college was Professor C.W. Irwin. He carefully followed the principles of Christian education as had been revealed to us through Sister White. He didn't deviate in any respect from any principle. And Australian Missionary College reported that for the first time it did all its bookkeeping with black ink during the time that Professor Irwin was principal. Now, one of the troubles in Healdsburg College was that we got terribly in debt, closed with a debt of $30,000, and that was a tremendous sum in those days. Just seemed as if we couldn't keep out of debt. So when the conference purchased the Angren Summer Resort, they said, now, we'll start a college here, but we want a man who does his bookkeeping with black ink. We don't want any more red ink. And so she said, well, I know one man that can conduct the school and keep it out of debt. Well, where is he? Who is he? Well, it's Charles W. Irwin over in Australia. And my cablegram went over there too quick for anything. To ask Professor Charles W. Irwin if he would come to California and take up this responsibility of this new college. Now, things went so badly, oh, I'm so sorry and so ashamed to say this, in the last days of Healdsburg College, that many of our people had taken their children out of the college and put them, well, at Berkeley and Stanford and other worldly colleges. Oh, it was a sad time. It was a very sad time. Now then, here comes this stranger, and he's to conduct a college and see that it never gets into debt and build up faith once more in our own college. He, a stranger. Well, he arrived in Oakland, and before he'd ever seen it. They gave him the keys down in Oakland. That's where the conference headquarters was then. And he started up, crossed the bay on a ferry boat. That's the way we crossed in those days, before the bridge was built. And as he did, he thought to himself, well, now, next Monday, school is to begin. That's how much preparation he had for it. There was nothing there but the buildings that Mr. Anwin had for his summer resort. And he said, why, they didn't give me any money. And I'll have to buy some groceries. So he pulled out his pocketbook and looked it over, and he found that he had $25 of his own money. So he took out his notebook and began to make a list of the things that he would just have to start the school, like flour and sugar and so on. Well, as he sat there, he told me this himself. Across on the deck, the other side of the deck, he saw a gentleman sitting who kept looking at him, kind of like that. And presently, this gentleman got up and came over, and he said, Professor Irwin, I believe, gave his name, said he was from Sebastopol. He said, I understand that you're starting a new school up here in the hills. I've been down and transacted a little business in the city, and as I saw you sitting here, it occurred to me that you might need a little money. You might be glad to have a little extra change, and I happen to have, $25. Could you use it? Well, could he use it? So Pacific Union College was begun with $50. Professor Irwin stopped in St. Helena and bought $50 worth of groceries. A team was there ready to take him up the hill. The horses and wagons and buggies and coaches that Mr. Anwin had used to bring the summer resort people up to his resort he had sold with the place. And there was a man there to meet Professor Irwin. So up he came with his groceries to start the college, a new college here. And there was one young man waiting to register. Now, I wonder if you could imagine who that young man was. His name was Charles D. Upp. That's interesting, isn't it? And so he became the first registered student of the new college. Managed finally to get 60 or 70 together to begin school. And there was a hotel and 5 cottages. Some of the summer resort people that came up there thought the hotel was noisy. So many people there, and some of them didn't want to go to bed at a reasonable hour. So one by one, Mr. Anwin built some of these cottages, little cottages. Well, they were about 3 rooms under the same roof, but they were separate. There was no doors between. Each was for a separate guest, 3 in each one. He finally had built 5. Then he had an amusement hall, a swimming pool, and the old ranch house that he had lived in before he built the hotel for a resort. And that's all there was. And it was that Pacific Union College began. Well, after a while, do you know that there was an editor down here in the Pacific Press that was so interested in that school that he asked for leave of absence. That was Elder Oscar Tate. He said, I want to go up there and help in that school. Sister White had been down here, and she dropped some word about the needs up there. You know, when they bought it, there were 1,600 acres of land. and 1,000 acres of that had timber on it. He went up there. He saw how cramped and crowded they were. And you know, he went away and bought a second-hand sawmill with Sister White's approval and had it moved down there. Then, one morning, he called all the boys together. Professor Irwin had told him that he might have the first choice of the young men to work in that sawmill. Well, he called all the boys together, and he didn't know their names. But he said, now, the first one that I will select is that little freckle-faced boy over there. I don't know his name. Come here, Sonny. And who do you suppose it was? It was Lonnie Baker. I afterward asked Elder Tate why he had chosen him first. Well, he said, I knew he had energy because he was always first at breakfast. So he chose a crew for the sawmill. And those boys worked there. My brother worked there 5 years in that sawmill. Now this school was started, as Sister White had said, as a study work school. You know what that is, a study work school? The rules were this, that every student there was expected to work 2.5 hours a day. Now these rules he had made up down in the office of Sister White. They together made the rules for PUC, and that was the first one, that it was to be a work-study school. And these rules said that every student there, boy or girl, made no difference who it was, should work 2.5 hours every day. And then, if they wished to earn something on their tuition, they might have 2.5 hours more. So my brother worked 5 hours every day in that old sawmill. And I was pleased once. I was in a meeting. He didn't know I was present. He was asked what was the best thing he got out of college. He says, I learned to work. And wasn't I proud of him? Yes, I was. He says, I learned to work. Do you see? Oh, I got many good things, but he said, that's what I count best. I learned to work. He says, I learned the dignity of labor. And that's a good deal. That's one of the fundamental principles of Christian education. And everyone not only studies, but he works, and works every day. Well, up there, everybody worked, even fathers. I can remember, my most vivid picture of President Irwin was in the rain. It rained and rained and rained up there. We finally built a dormitory, West Hall. But you know, just as we got it done, a spring broke out underneath it. Oh, everything happened that could, it seemed. Well, I've seen Professor Irwin out in the rain in his hip boots, shoveling mud, making a ditch to run the water off from around the buildings. And Professor Newton helping the boys to manage old Maud. That's what they called a tractor that hauled in the logs from 1,000 acres. You know, when the boys came in, they looked just like Negroes. Brother stoked it for a while, and I didn't know whether it was my brother or who it was when he came to dinner. But he was healthy. And you know, in all my teaching, I never had trouble. I never had to spend time trying to exhort my pupils to study. I had the most studious pupils there that I ever had anywhere. I can remember when industrial education was first taught about in the public schools. And I went to a teacher's institute back in Colorado when I was a girl when it was being discussed. And what decision do you think all the teachers came to? It was this: oh, we can't have the students work. If they do, they'll be too tired to study, and they won't have time to study. My own dear teacher, I had a teacher that I thought was perfect, but he was against this. Why, he said it's a crazy idea, this idea of having students work. When you study, you must study. You can't work. Well, Professor Irwin proved that that wasn't true. Well, when they worked, they could study better. They had good circulation. Their brains were clear. And you know, they were always ready for extracurricular activities. I know, because I was given this duty to, Professor Irwin didn't believe in paying people to come there and entertain us. You remember, he was doing his bookkeeping with black ink, and he didn't hire famous people at a large sum to come and play for us or to lecture to us. But he asked me for one thing, once a month, to give a program on Saturday night. And I did that for 8 years. And in all those 8 years, I had but one refusal. And that was after the World War began. And the students were so disturbed over that they couldn't think of much of anything else. But when things were normal, I never had one to refuse. And no matter how much time it took, they were ready to do it, even after a hard day of study and work. I did if I may judge my own work, did my best work there because the conditions were right. Now, oft times, Sister White came up and talked to us and encouraged us. Now, our school building was the old recreation hall, and our chapel was what had been the ballroom when it was a resort. And the bunting was still hanging there when we began, that they'd adorned it with. But we had some wonderful times in that chapel. The bowling alley was the Bible room. That is what had been the bowling alley. Oh, we just did anything and everything to get along, and I never heard anybody complain about it. Every roof on the place leaked the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, because we couldn't get them mended. You didn't have the money. So we just brought out all the pans and pails and put them under the leaks, and we didn't fuss about it because while I was putting pans under the leaks in my little house, I knew everybody else was doing the same. There was no place for envy, you know, and because we were all doing the same thing. Well, as I said, Sister White came as often as possible and spoke to us and encouraged us and told us that God was with that school. He will be with you as long as you are with Him, she said. And then there came a time when she didn't come for quite a while, and we became a little anxious about it and was asking for her. So finally, I think Professor Irwin must have told her that we were all very anxious to have her come once more. So she was brought up the night before and put to bed in the dormitory. And the next morning, they brought her over. We were still having chapel in the ballroom. Her son brought her, and Professor Irwin and Brother White, her son, just picked her up and carried her in. She was so feeble then, and there were awkward steps to come up in. And when she came to the rostrum, they had to lift her up into the rostrum. And Brother White stood beside her with his arm about her and supported her while she spoke. I don't think she spoke more than 10 minutes. She wasn't able. But this is what she said, as nearly as I can remember. She said, "My dear young people, I am grateful to God that He has given me strength once more to come to speak to you. You have a rare privilege of establishing a new school. You may have some inconveniences, but, as she said, yours is a great privilege to establish a school on right principles." You know, I've learned since that the early days of an institution are its best days. Yes, I've learned that too. I know now what she meant. She said, "I was young like you when God called me to His work. And I put my armor on, and I've never taken it off, and I never shall till my work is done." Dear young people, when you put your hand to the plow, never turn back. I hope that every one of you has consecrated your life to the work of God. Count the cost, my young friends, and when you have determined to do that, don't let anything hinder you. Don't be discouraged. "Oh," she said, I know what the evil one does. I know by what he's tried to do to me, to discourage me through 70 long years. But I put my armor on way back when I was a girl, and I've never taken it off, and I never shall till my work is done." And she paused. "And it's almost done. My secretaries are busy these days gathering the material for another book." She says, "You know, God has helped me to write a series of books, but there's one lacking still. I haven't yet a book on the latter part of the Old Testament. But I have written a good deal upon that, here and there, and my secretaries are gathering it together, and I help them as much as I can. But I'm not as strong as I used to be. But I shall not lay my armor off. God will help me to finish this book. I have the assurance that He will help me to finish this book." Now that book was Prophets and Kings. The manuscript was ready, but it wasn't published till after her death. She never saw the book in book form, but the manuscript was ready. Then she said, "I think I can't speak any more to you today, but remember, put your armor off and never take it off. I will never take my armor off until my work is done." Then they took her away, took her out and put her in a chair on the porch while Brother White went for the carriage for her. We could see her through the glass doors. I think we were all weeping. And you know, as she sat there, she began to sing. She loved to sing. And they told me that it was an old Advent hymn. The only words I remember is, "Jesus is coming again, coming again, coming again." Then they took her away. And we knew that we had seen her for the last time. But I don't think anyone that was in that chapel can ever forget her last words. I have put my armor on, and I'll never take it off till my work is done.